Energy Heracles, never get that right, Heracles well pad conditional use. I'm going to start by making just a few general comments. We would remind everybody that outbursts of any kind or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated, and anybody becoming disruptive will be removed. Second, in accordance with the Township public participation policy, Township residents, and with case law, Township residents will be given 3 minutes for public comment when we get to that part of the hearing. That said, it being that there's such a large group of attendants, I would ask that if you have comments, please don't be repetitive. If you can help it, if someone else said it, you can just say, I agree with that person. If you have a large group of people and you want to designate one person to speak on your behalf, that would be greatly appreciated. That being said, it should be noted that this public hearing has been properly advertised in accordance with the requirement of the NPC, and the property has been posted. At this time, I'm going to go into the applications for party status. Rich Algieri is on the phone, as well as Kyle Walk is on the phone. So, Rich, I'm just gonna mute you. If you want something to be said, just let me know and I'll unmute you, okay? Because I'm getting a little bit of static from you. I'm gonna start with Amy Terza. Can you please come up to the microphone now? Oh, I'm sorry, Terza, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And your address, ma'am?
1633 Scenery Drive.
Okay. And your specific impact to this pad, how far away are you from the proposed site?
I'm not sure exactly of the location, but we're just about 15 houses past the high school. So if that gives you an idea. And yeah.
Is it more than a mile, less than a mile?
No, less than a half.
More than a half mile, less than a half mile?
I'd say maybe a half mile.
Okay.
Any impact that you asked?
Any specific impacts other than location?
Young children. I have a high schooler who is in the high school, and then a younger child who will be coming through.
Yeah, anything specific with the site? Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Lucas, do you have any questions?
Yeah, maybe Lucas alone. I could blame Lucas on behalf of Olympus in that area. I have a map that I've marked as part of Exhibit H. That's another one that we made introduced earlier, which shows the location of the well pad and has concentric circles showing a half mile, 3/4 of a mile, 1 mile, 1/4 mile. Can you put your initials on where your house is?
Sure.
We don't have any objection.
You'll be granted party status, ma'am. Thank you. I'm gonna give you- Karen Lynn, L-I-N. Ms. Lynn, what's your address?
1694 Scenery Drive.
And what is your location in proximity to the proposed well pad?
Less than a mile from the high school.
Okay. More than a half mile, less than a half mile?
I would say less than a half.
Less than a half mile, okay. Any other specific impacts?
Traffic, the noise, dirt.
Mr. Lucas?
Yeah, that asked you to say that, I asked, you can just put the initials.
granted party status, ma'am. Thank you.
There's not on the camera, and she can't hear anything.
Charles Saleo, Seleo. Okay. Come on up, sir. Please, when you come up, make sure you speak into the microphone. The people on Zoom apparently can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Sir, your address?
1980 Scenery Drive, I'm like right on, I can walk to the site there.
How close are you to the site?
I can walk there.
Oh, okay.
My uncles were millers, a farmer. Dan Miller owns all that land there. I'm related to them.
Any objection, Mr. Lucas?
No.
You'll be granted status, party status, sir. Thank you.
So I did too.
That's it.
I can't say nothing else.
Not yet. You'll have an opportunity. You're in the case. Congratulations.
Whatever, you're not.
Sit, have a seat. I'll call you when it's your time, sir. Joel Whiteman, Whitedeman.
That's what with money.
General Whiteman, 126 Walnut Circle,
Okay, your location is proposed pad, ma'am?
less than a mile.
More than a half mile, less than a half
More
mile?
than a half mile, less than a full mile.
Mr. Lucas, any objections?
I will object to case law towards the proposition that half mile.
And, I understand your objection, however, there's no rule that I'm aware of for the MPC that establishes the defined criteria for standing as those living within a quarter mile or a half mile. I would argue that the issue of standing discussed in the MPC and established case law provides for any persons aggrieved beyond that of the general public. I have received notification via letter from Olympus Civil Engineering Company that my property will be impacted. And I would also like to point out that on Olympus Energy's own website, they identify that in the case of an emergency or evacuation, their alert system goes out to those residing within 1 mile and would ask that the board to establish standing as impacted residents that live or recreate at a minimum of 1 mile.
Thank you, ma'am. You'll be granted party status.
Thanks.
No objections noted. Stanley Stephan, Steffan.
Sandy Stephan, 105 Maple Circle.
And your proximity to the pad, ma'am?
Approximately a half mile.
Any objections, Mr. Lucas?
But you live in close proximity to Wayne.
Yes, we're close to well past that.
I'll note the objection.
Objection noted. You're granted party status, ma'am. Eric Catcher, Katcher, correct?
Nobody here calls it right.
I'm sorry, your handwriting is
You are.
as bad as mine.
That's all right.
Katchur. I'm spelling it for the record.
It's okay.
Your address
105 Maple Circle,
and your proximity to the proposed pad?
less than a half mile.
Sir, could you, note on exhibit H, initials, as your initial breaker?
I can't even read that with my glasses on. You'd have to put that up.
Sir, you live in Fox Run?
I live across from Mr. Porter.
So you live in Fox Run, correct?
Yes. Yeah, early on.
You're right about that. No.
Okay, you'll be granted party status, sir.
Thanks.
Cindy Schmidt, Schchmidt.
Hi,
Hi.
Cindy Schmidt, 1641 Scenery Drive,
And your proximity to the proposed pad?
half a mile, less than half a mile.
Less than a half a mile? Any objections, Mr. Lucas?
I don't know if that's the way right to go.
Appreciate that. You'll be granted party status, ma'am. Thank you.
I have not. Okay.
Sandra Hearn, Hearn. Your address, ma'am?
156 Grouse, Grousd Drive, Elizabeth, PA, 15037.
And your proximity to the proposed well pad?
Less than a mile,
More than a half a mile?
more than a half.
Okay. Mr. Lucas?
Mark, your original class.
Objection is noted. You'll be granted party status, ma'am. Thank you. Protect Elizabeth Township, Scott Taylor.
Good evening, everybody. Scott Taylor. Just got a text you like 10 seconds ago that you still can't hear on the Zoom.
I don't know how they.
None of them are muted, so I don't know what I'm working on. Okay. Fair enough.
Your address, sir?
My address, 304, I'm actually representative of Elizabeth Township, community for Elizabeth Township area and citizens of the township.
Are you-
The office address is 304 Mohawk Drive.
Are you applying on behalf of yourself or on behalf of your organization?
On behalf of the organization.
And do you have members that live in close proximity to the well pad?
I do. I got Brandy, Pravansky, Gloria Artis.
Slow down, you're gonna have to spell those names. Sorry about that.
Brandy Pravansky, Brandi, Krivansky, lives at 1947 Parkside Drive. Gloria Artis, Artis, lives at 1933 Parkside Drive. Jackie Gruden, Jakie Gerdun, lives at 2064 Scenery Drive. Get all that? Perfect. These folks are elderly. A couple of them are their siblings. We're going to try to be here to get status on their own. They may or may not be. I don't know. But in the meantime, I'd like to represent these folks and put their voices out there.
And what proximity is the closest?
All of them are within a half mile.
Okay. Any objection, Mr. Lucas?
No.
You'll be granted party status. Thank you.
Can I have one more note of clarification, if you don't mind now? We're saying that this hearing is for the well pad, the well site?
It's actually for both. It's for the interconnect and the pad.
That's why I asked, because it was
Right.
advertised for both. Are we gonna run
That's right.
both of them
It's on both.
simultaneously
Yes,
tonight,
it's
or
on both.
separately?
It is for both, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Grice, Grice.
Ted Grice, 1645 Seabury Drive. I am one house up from Cindy, 3 houses up from Amy.
Granted party status, sir. Thank you. And Eric Piper, PIPER.
Eric Piper, 103 Teak Road. I think I'm a half mile away.
You're in Fox Run, sir?
Yeah.
Any objection, Mr. Lucas?
No.
I appreciate that. Now you'll be granted party status. sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the party status forms. I'm sorry, we do have some online.
I'm having a little trouble with Zoom, it's starting to freeze up. So I might have to log off and everyone has to log back on.
You already did. You're not on now.
No, I have to shut it down on my end.
All right.
I love technology.
It was working until I tried to turn on the camera.
Okay.
Just letting you know it was off.
Yeah, so if you can hear me on Zoom.
We have to deal with this issue because the party status, people have rights to cross-examination of witnesses, and so I have to do this first, so we'll take a 5-minute recess.
I apologize, we had 4 notes, I had 2 that were part of that.
You want a chair?
He walked in.
You obviously are ready.
We got rolling. Same there, same there, same there. That's what I'm talking forward. I'm a flag. In the last. There's people. I don't
Leaseholders. Yeah, that's, I mean, that's what the invites to the picnic, all the leaseholders. If you have a lease, whether it's a surface or something. I think that's what, I'm drawing a blank, my mind's like the 13th. Yeah, it's the express standard, yes.
Is there anybody online that's seeking party status for anyone before we get started? If they can put their name and address in the chat, we may be able to get through them without objection if possible. Okay, hold on a second. You ready? It is 7:32 and we're back on the record. We are looking onto Zoom for anybody seeking party status. Mr. Butler, is there anybody online seeking party status? If you could give their name and address, please.
The first is Carol Bailey, 2967 Jackson Road.
She's in White. Can she speak? Is there, okay, she can put, obviously it's not proximity if there are specific impacts that she would like for us to consider.
Carol, are you available? Carol, can you hear me?
Okay, you can hear her a little bit. Hold on one second, yeah. Ma'am, we'll give you a microphone, okay.
Where's your microphone? I think Carol can speak. I can hear you in the room. Why can you hear me? I have one more time, I'm sorry. Greg, what number, Mike? Mike, number? One time, Carol. That community option. It's all.
Maybe she could type it in the chat, since we can't hear
Type it
it.
in the chat.
That way it's, yeah, it can be read into the record.
Yes, if you don't mind.
We would like to have her put it in the comments, because we can't hear what she's saying.
Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next. I'll mute you for now.
Have her call a cell phone.
Matt, I gotta object to this, man, we can't do this for all the cross-examination, there's
Yeah, I
somebody
know.
gonna translate
I
that?
know, I actually have never had where Zoom is an option to partake in it, so it's very unusual. I'm trying to do the best I can to give everybody an opportunity. I mean, it is something that's important, and, you know, some people have health issues and other things that make them incapacitated, which is why we tried to offer the Zoom option so that they could
You
participate.
guys have a set of computer speakers?
It's just,
Just plug them in, and you'll be able to hear fine. Pretty simple.
is there anybody else on there seeking party status? Okay, one more. There's only one more, so.
Her name is Barbara Randall,
Okay, I'm gonna say that's not proximity, so ma'am, you as well, if you could put into the chat your specific reason as briefly as you can as to your specific impact.
Go ahead, Barbara. Can you hear me, Barbara? Sister wants to know the specific impact.
The specific impacts of the proposed site to you and your property. I heard her say she does not live in the township. Ma'am, I'm going to deny your party status, but I appreciate you, and you're certainly welcome to stay on to Zoom.
So he's going to deny your party status, but you're more than welcome to stay on the show.
Carol Daly.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, if this doesn't work, or if it does, because she's not within, she's far away, so I'm curious.
Yes, Carol, I hear you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Protected list has been granted party status, yes. Well, Mr. Taylor, on behalf of the organization, has been granted right on behalf of Protect Elizabeth. So yeah, they will have the rights to cross-examine each witness, yes. No, Scott's gonna represent on behalf of the organization. So yeah, if anyone else within there wants individual party status, they're free to seek it, but Mr. Taylor was the applicant, so Mr. Taylor will have the right, as a representative, as he stated, of multiple members to cross-examine each witness. I don't know why I'm trying to get with Carol Daly. I was trying to seek, since she was seeking party status, so that we kind of got off track there. So if Ms. Daly can set forth her reason for seeking party status.
I'm seeking party status, specifically this pond. I'm like looking across the town. I'm a researcher, so I would like to participate in this. And with that, I have been involved in this for a long time, so
She's been involved for a long time, and she's done research, is what I've heard so far. And I appreciate that, Ms. Daly, although I'm going to deny your party status at this time. So thank you very much. Okay, I think that concludes the applicants for party status. I do want to make a couple of quick comments here. Oh, there is one more online? Great. This online thing is working out so well.
Come on.
lives within a quarter of a mile?
Yes.
What is the address again?
No, I don't believe it would be quarter mile. I live outside of one.
Oh, outside of 1 mile?
However,
okay.
speaking party status to the regular recreation and youth sports activities at the Elizabeth Forward High School with my children.
Okay. I appreciate that. Any comments, Mr. Lucas?
Yes, we would object, merely because, not that you weren't concerned about the children, but merely because someone's attending a school doesn't provide party status. If I can clean the look correctly, this individual lives over a mile away. There's case law worthy of the Robinson Township, versus Mount Pleasant Township. Commonwealth Court ruled that student status or parents of students doesn't rise to party status.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that case. And ma'am, I appreciate you, but I am going to deny your party status at this time. Okay.
Well, I would like to, and unfortunately I cannot hear him via this, so I'm not sure what the figure.
I can't. You will certainly have the right to participate via public comment portion, so you'll be able to participate in the hearing, certainly. I can't really hear what you're saying.
Am I getting it correct that you're denying my party status,
Yes, your party status has been denied, ma'am. Yes.
even though I regularly recreate on Elizabeth Ford High School with my children?
Yes, that's noted for the record, ma'am. So, thank you. Okay. I did want to make a couple of comments that I don't think I made at the outset before we get started with the applicant's presentation. I did want to note that this proposal and these applications have been recommended by the Township Planning Commission at their last meeting. I do intend to end these proceedings as close to 10 o'clock as I can. We do already have another hearing date scheduled for next Thursday at 7 o'clock, anticipating that this will take longer than tonight. So on both those evenings, and if it does proceed past that, we will certainly schedule hearings going farther. But I do intend to end this at as close to 10 as we can. I'm certainly not going to cut off a witness or cut off a cross-examination in the middle, but if there's a logical place to break that's close to 10 o'clock, I'm intending to do that. Last comment, at the break, we had discussed the applicant has a witness that has a travel issue, so they're going to try and get to that witness as quickly as they can. So they will have their first witness, Mr. Daly, I believe. So before we do cross-examination, because there's a lengthy amount of people that have the right to cross-examine each witness, we're going to do the direct of Mr. Daly, then we'll do the second witness that has the travel issue, allow cross-examination of that witness, and then go back to the cross-examination for Mr. Daly, just logically speaking, so we don't have a problem with this witness having to leave and re-travel back to Pittsburgh. So if that's in everybody's agreement, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Lucas and the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Tunis, and members of the commission. What you have before you tonight are actually two related applications. There's a conditional use application. There's a conditional use application for Olympus Energy LLC to construct and operate an oil and gas well site known as the Heracles well pad. That pad and most of the access road are on property owned by Ronald and Marguerite Lombardo. Part of the access road is actually on property owned by Richard Everly. Access to the site is by a long access road directly off of Route 51. Olympus is proposing up to 6 wells to be drilled at this site. The other application is a conditional use application by Hyperion Midstream, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Olympus, to construct and operate what is known as the Heracles interconnect and pipeline. This pad is immediately adjacent to the well pad on the Everly property, and we use the same access road. And the interconnect facility, what it does is facilitates the flow of gas from the Heracles well pad directly into the existing Equitrans interstate transmission line that traverses across the property. as Mr. Rakunas indicated, the planning commission has recommended approval of both of these matters. Before beginning our presentation, though, I wanted to point out a couple of legal standards and evidentiary burdens that are applicable to these types of applications. So don't have a lot of these before you, and several of the board members, I think, are relatively new. Oil and gas well sites are authorized as a conditional use on the property, and the interconnect is classified as an oil and gas operation, which is also authorized as conditional use on this property. As such, because the ordinance designated those as being authorized as conditional use on the property, it's presumed upfront that they're consistent with the public health, safety, and welfare. The legal burden then shifts to, so what that means is Olympus has to establish a black and white requirements in the ordinance, like setbacks and those kind of things. We'll establish if all those have been met here. At that point, however, on general health and safety issues, those opposed to the application, there's several here today, obviously, and it's their right to be here. They have to provide specific evidence, not general concerns, and establishing why this well pad has impacts beyond those that would be normally associated with any well pad. It's not enough just to say we're opposed to oil and gas development. There has to be something specific about this particular application that has an adverse impact beyond that normally associated. And again, that burden is actually not on Olympus, but on those opposed to the application. Even though that's the case, we recognize the public concern because of the proximity to the Elizabeth Forward High School. So we're going to actually have some testimony tonight from our second witness that directly addresses some of those general health and safety concerns. We would like to point out, as it relates to the school, prior to 2019, your zoning ordinance required oil and gas operations, including well sites, to be at least 500 feet from the actual well bore to a nearby occupied structure. That basically mirrors state law, still does. In 2019, however, you amended your ordinance to increase that setback 500 feet from a well bore to an occupied structure to 750 feet from the edge of the pad to the occupied structure. And when you add in the distance from the well bore to the edge of the pad, you're talking something probably in the range of 950 feet. Critically also, this board amended the ordinance to require that there be a setback of 1,500 feet from the edge of the well pad to any school property line. And that effectively, when you count in the distance from the well bores to the well pad, effectively you have almost a 2,000-foot setback that's written into your ordinance. We saw there was a public comment or a news article recently suggesting that somehow this board had reduced those setbacks. Quite frankly, the opposite of that has happened. And so when you take that into account, you're roughly 2,000 feet, you're 4 times what the minimum requirement is at the state level. And we're going to have our witnesses talk about that. And some of those distances, I'm going to show you some drone footage of the relative proximity of the proposed developments, the school, and some of the other surrounding property. As a final aside, there are a number of other governmental approvals that any operator has to get when they propose a well pad. Approvals from DEP, you actually have approvals from PennDOT and the like. The law on that is that since you have all these multiple balls in the air, if we establish that we meet all the other requirements under the ordinance, the appropriate course is to approve it with the condition that all those other permits be obtained before development starts. It's not a basis for denial. This was an issue that was raised, I think, back at the planning commission level at one point. So with that general intro, our first witness is going to be Mr. Ryan Daly from CEC. He's the project manager for this project. Just to note for the record, we have prepared 2 binders sitting in front of Mr. Rakunas that we've marked as the Olympus and Hyperion exhibits A and B. A is the application for the well pad, B is the application for the interconnect and associated pipelines. He only brought one set. I think there were 17 sets of this delivered to the township originally, so he's interested in preserving a few trees. We just have one master set here. And we'll leave that with the board report. And as we go through the testimony, there's a handful of other exhibits that we'll enter into the record. So with that, we'd like to present Mr. Daly, and I think the court reporter to swear him in.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. All right, as Blaine mentioned, my name is Ryan Daly. I'm a project manager with Civil Environmental Consultants. I'm going to start off by familiarizing everybody with the site location. As Blaine mentioned, the site is located within the R1 zoning district. The Heracles well pad, situated in the center of the screen in front of us, is located entirely on the Lombardo property, which is approximately 187 acres total. So rather large property that takes off the greater portion of the left side of the screen. Access to the site is directly off of Route 51, so it follows along the Lombardo property, crosses onto two Everly parcels, and then back up to the well pad. So the Everly parcels are 63 acres, which is this property to the north, and then 32 acres, which is the property off to the east here. As you can see on the screen, the darker areas here are existing woodlands. The lighter areas are open field area. So the majority of the Lombardo property is wooded. The Everly properties are mostly open field at the moment.
Just for the record, the projection of this particular drawing this drawing was included in the application materials as the exhibit A5. And we've handed out extra hard copies of it to the board.
Great. A couple other items to note. The high school is located in the very upper right-hand corner of this screen. Route 48, or Scenery Drive, cuts along the lower right-hand corner, and then State Route 51 actually comes up along the left-hand side of this plan. As Blaine mentioned, there are several setback requirements that the site's required to meet. The first one is just general oil and gas operations, which has a 500-foot setback to a protected structure. That's shown by this light blue line that circles the well pad. That line is shown 500 feet from the edge of the pad. There are no protected structures within that area. The second one is a 750-foot setback for oil and gas well sites, and that's shown by this light pink line, again, that circles the pad, and that's shown from 750 feet from the edge of the pad. Again, no protected structures are located within that area. And then the final setback is 1,500 feet from the property line of a property containing a school. So as I mentioned, the high school is located up in the upper right here. That property line follows closely on this transition from the light open field to the wooded area. And the 1,500-foot setback from the edge of the well pad follows this light orange line that stays within the Everly property. So we meet that setback as well. On the topic of protected structures, just going to run you around the site real quick and list off a couple distances to the nearest protected structures. So the closest protected structure is actually 1,000 feet to the west. So that's located on the neighboring property in this direction. To the northwest. Coming around to the west, several of these properties along Bird Lane. The closest one is approximately 1,300 feet from the edge of the well pad. Circling down around to the southwest, The actual landowner's house is approximately 1,950 feet from the edge of the well pad. Really nothing located to the south until we get quite a ways off the page here. But if we circle around to the southeast and east, several of these properties along Scenery Drive are anywhere from 1,800 feet to 2,300 feet away from the well pad. And then finally, if we circle up around to the northeast, where the Everly properties are, again, those are right around 1,500 feet from the edge of the well pad. And lastly, the distance from the very northeast corner of the well pad to the very corner of the high school building is over 2,000 feet. As I mentioned, first thing, access is going to be from Route 51. The majority of the access road is actually going to be paved most of the way up until we get on top of the hill, and then it will be gravel over to the well pad. That access road will be 24 feet wide, which is standard for Olympus well sites, and approximately total length of 3,750 feet. The well pad itself will be 340 feet wide by 500 feet long. That's just a touch smaller than Olympus's typical size. That's simply due to several site constraints, including existing topography. The pad will be gravelled. There'll be a 2-foot high earthen berm the entire way around the perimeter of the pad. Stormwater BMPs for this site. We do have infiltration basin, wet pond, rain garden, and infiltration berms designed to control stormwater runoff from the site. The total limit of disturbance is approximately 24 acres, and all that design is included in the E&S permit that is currently under review with the PADP. Once the pad is operational, they will have 24/7 security on site during active drilling and completions operations. Once those activities are complete, there will be a security gate installed on the access road, so that'll be located in this general area. That access gate would be locked, however, first responders would have access to that gate if they ever needed it. And then finally, permanent fencing. Again, once the site is operational, they would have chain link fence around the perimeter of the pad and around any stormwater BMPs. Lastly, there will be temporary light plants on site, again, when they have active operations during drilling and completions. Similar to other well pads in the township, those lights will be directed downward and inwards to the pad. And again, will only be required when they have active operations on the pad.
I make one comment that I forgot to make earlier. I just wanted to remind the commissioners, at any time before or after, if you have questions of the witnesses, feel free to speak up and ask questions. You're certainly free to ask and get answers to any questions of any witnesses that you want at any time. So I just wanted to remind you all of that. Thank you. Sorry, Brian.
Ryan, let's shift gears down and talk a little bit about the access to the site. You projected up on the screen one of a copy of one of the several maps from the application, specifically the application there with the exhibit H. So if you could walk through the access plan here.
Sure. So as mentioned, access is going to be directly off of State Route 51. So on the map in front of us, we can see Interstate 70 in the lower right-hand corner. State Route 51 intersects I-70, so from I-70, traffic would follow State Route 51 north directly to the site, access the site, and then if you're familiar with State Route 51, it is a divided highway in this location, so any traffic exiting the site would have to exit to the north, make the turnaround at State Route 2028,
and then return southbound on 51 to I-70. So with that route, no township roads would be used to access the site. Similarly, they have a second route proposed coming from Toll Road 43. So again, they would come south on Route 51. Because it's a divided highway, they would turn around at State Route 136 to make the crossover back to Route 51 north, come north into the site, and then any vehicles leaving the site would exit Route 51 north again, back to Route 43. So again, no township roads on that route.
Would that be restricted?
Sir, there's no questions from the audience at this time, so please hold your questions. Thank you. There'll be an opportunity for public comment later, so thank you.
And then the last thing I was going to touch on for the well pad is just give you guys a brief schedule of what the plan is at the moment. So Olympus anticipates, if all approvals are in place, to begin construction sometime around March of 2023, with drilling beginning later in the fall, so around September of 23. Completions then wouldn't occur until early 2024, with the anticipated turn-in date of spring of 2024. Yes. Yes, turn-in line, yes.
I have a question. How many trucks are we going to see? Hold on, that's Commissioner Chris Toma. How many trucks are we going to per day on average?
I believe another witness can address the exact numbers. However, I can state that Olympus does intend to pipe fresh water to the site, which if you're familiar with the operations, that's usually the largest truck demand.
We'll have a future witness who will get into that in much more detail.
What's the status of your HOP? Coming off 51, what's the status?
So we have submitted the HOP application to PennDOT. Due to the nature of the HOP with stormwater drainage connecting to an existing PennDOT facility, we are required to get a signature from the township in order to complete that application. So our understanding is the township would intend to have this hearing prior to signing off on that application.
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Walker.
Where will the water truck be running exactly?
Mr. Daly, Commissioner Walk would like to know where the water trucks will be traveling daily. That was the route you just explained?
Correct. So any water trucks that would be necessary would follow the whole route we just discussed.
The whole route, which would be Route 51 directly accessing the site. Commissioner Walk.
Understood, so no water trucks will be moved off of 51 to the site.
Would any water trucks be off of Route 51 to the site?
But they would enter the site from Route 51, but no other roads within the township would be used.
I heard the answer, Matt, but my question is, where are these water trucks going to get their water, and where will they be moving?
As I say, I'm not the right person to answer that question.
As Mr. Walk, a future witness will address that issue.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, please.
All right, the second map that I pulled up looks very similar to the first map we just discussed for the well pad site. This site is focused, or this map is focused on specifically the interconnect pads. So again, the well pad located central to this site, or central to this page. The interconnect pad highlighted a little darker shade off just to the east of the well pad. Again, site is located within the R1 zoning district. This site is entirely on the Everly property, which is this property that I'm highlighting here. Again, since the interconnect site does not have any wells proposed on it, this is required to meet the general oil and gas operations setback, which is 500 feet from the edge of the pad. So that setback is shown with this light blue circle that goes around the pad. And similar to the well pad, there are no protected structures within that setback. Real quick on distances to the nearest protected structures, from the edge of the pad to the nearest protected structure would be approximately 1,300 feet to the northeast. Again, that's the surface owner, Mr. Everly's property. Circling around to the east and the southeast, again, these properties along Scenery Drive are anywhere from 1,400 to 1,900 feet from the edge of the pad. Heading over to the southwest, approximately 2,500 feet away. Again, circling up around to the west, along Ferd Lane, these properties are around 1,900 feet away. Directly to the northwest, again, the closest structure to the well pad, in this case, is about 1,400 feet away from the interconnect pad. And then directly to the north, over 1,700 feet. And similarly, from the edge of the interconnect pad to the nearest wall of the high school is over 1,800 feet away.
I think again, the drawing that we're referring to is exhibit B4.
B as in boy.
B as in boy.
Access to the interconnect will utilize the well pad access road, so they will have a short gravel access road that comes off the main well pad road and hops over to the interconnect. That's generally about 15 feet wide and only about 170 feet long. The interconnect pad itself has dimensions of approximately 150 feet wide and 250 feet long. Again, the pad will be gravel. As far as stormwater best management practices are concerned for this site, we do have a managed release concept, BMP, located just north of the pad. Approximately 3 acres is included in the limited disturbance, which are all shown on the ESCGP 3 application that is under review with the PADP. Similar to the well pad, Hyperion will install chain link fencing around the perimeter of the pad and the stormwater BMPs with a locked gate at the access road entrance. And again, any first responders would have access to that gate. As far as lighting is concerned on the interconnect pad, there is no permanent dusk to dawn type lighting at the pad. There will be light fixtures installed on certain facilities at the site, but those would only be turned on if there's an employee that needs to be on site after. And finally, as Blaine mentioned up front, the intent of the interconnect pad is to allow Olympus to transfer gas into the existing Equitrans pipeline. So there will be a short pipeline between the well pad and the interconnect pad that will be operated by Hyperion. And then they'll have the facilities on the interconnect pad, which Jeremy will address in future testimony. And then there'll be a short, again, connection into the existing Equitrans pipeline, which is shown on this figure by the light gray line that runs kind of north-south across this page. Finally, brief schedule for this site, similar to the well pad. Hyperion intends to begin construction in spring of 2023 with mechanical and electrical construction on the pad beginning summer of 23, and then the turn-in line date will be similar to the well pad sometime in spring of 2024. last plan that I pulled up, just a little closer view of the site, so you can see a little more of the detailed grading design, which incorporates both the well pad and the interconnect site designs.
And Ryan, the document you're referring to now has been marked as Exhibit C, and hard copies have been handed out to the commissioners.
So again, just to hit a few key items, again, entrance off of Route 51, access road comes up the hill through the Lombardo property. We have two PCSM BMPs located in this location. That'll be a rain guard. Two PCSM, that's post-construction stormwater management, best management practices, BMPs. Continuing up the access road, we have another BMP, which is a wet pond located near this bend in the access road. Across from that, we have a stockpile to support earthwork construction. Continuing up the hill, up around to the well pad and the interconnect location, we have another large stockpile in between the sites. This feature here is another PCSM BMP located below the well pad. And then finally, the PCSM BMP associated with the interconnect site that is located just north of the pad.
Okay, if we could now, Ryan, let's just go back and summarize what all the relevant distances are from both the well pad and the interconnect pad to schools and the property.
Yes, so from the well pad to the school property line is 1,730 feet. From the edge of the well pad to the actual school building, as I mentioned, is over 2,000 feet. From the closest well head located on the well pad to the school building is over 2,380 feet away. The interconnect pad from the edge of the pad to the property line of the school district is 1,430 feet. And again, the interconnect pad to the actual school building is 1,840 feet away.
What about the tap, the interconnect, the point where the interconnect gas connects into the transmission?
Correct. So from the tap location to the school property line is 1,398 feet. And from the interconnect tap to the school building itself is 1,840 feet.
Now, one of the questions that came up at the planning commission was why weren't these pads placed further away from the school? Although they meet the ordinance requirements, why weren't they placed further away than they are?
So in a minute, I'm going to show some drone footage of the site, which I think will give you a better idea. But to preface that, the major factor in determining where we're situated in the well pad on this property was simply topography constraints. So there's very steep slopes on portions of this property. So the only feasible location we found to situate the pad to meet all the setback requirements was the location we chosen. If we had moved it further west on the property, we would have started encroaching on the setbacks from those properties along Fern Lane. And if we removed it central to the Lombardo property, there were existing steep slopes and a stream valley that would prevent us from constructing a well pad in that location.
So, just summarize, you mentioned that you have some drone footage. What I'd like you to do now is walk through that. It'll be projected on the screen. We also have a flash drive that's been marked as Exhibit D. That will be included in the record. And when you go through this, Ryan, since someone reading the transcript will have the benefit of seeing this at the exact same time, try to verbalize as much as you can what you're showing. Correct.
Wayne, did you say you have a zip drive?
A flash drive.
A flash drive for the record?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so this first video we have up in front of you right now is located right at the northeast corner of where the proposed well pad is going to be. So the interconnect site would sit out in this field off to the right-hand side of the page. The well pad would actually sit kind of behind where we're viewing this at. The drone is hovering approximately 24 feet above the existing ground surface, which is approximately where the top of the sound walls on the well pad would be. These trees you see in front of us are obviously existing out in the middle of the Everly field. Those trees will more or less remain following construction. But just to orient everybody with the site, the high school again sits off to the upper left corner of this page beyond these trees. So again, the video is panning around in a 360-degree motion, looking back at the field. So we'll stop. So the access road coming up from Route 51 would be down over the hill here, coming up out of the woods and circling around through this little valley, and then coming up on top of the hill here onto the well pad, which is going to sit in these woods.
And you're pointing the area to the right on the screen right now.
Correct. So again, looking off of the woods, this is where the actual well pad itself would sit, and we're approximately the very northeast corner of the well pad. So finally, as we come around to where we started the video, these trees that are in front of us now would more or less remain, and the school and the properties to the east would be off in the background. Now, this second video I have up now is going to be the exact same rotation from the exact same location on the site. However, this time it's sitting approximately 150 feet above the ground, which would represent basically the top of the drill rig there, which would be basically the only piece of equipment that would be that high on the well pad. So as you can see off in the distance, the high school is located out here. This white roof would be the top of the football stadium. This house and barn in the foreground would be the Everly property buildings.
Hold on 1 second, is that on Zoom?
I think it is.
It is? Okay, that is the share screen, that's all, sorry.
So again, panning around, you can see the open fields on the Everly property. Stop here in a minute. Again, it's probably tough to see in the lighting, but there is a pretty significant valley that comes down through the Lombardo property. The access road is actually going to come up along the side of that, loop out into the field, and then again back into where the well pad will be situated in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So I'll stop again. As I mentioned, one of the reasons we chose the site location we did is simply to meet all the setback requirements. If we were to relocate the well pad further to the west or to the southwest on the Lombardo property, we would start encroaching on the setbacks for these structures along Burton Lake. So that's part of the reason why we chose the location we did. And similarly, you probably got a better view when we panned around of just the steep topography on the Lombardo property. And then additionally, you can see as we pan around again, there's going to be another stream valley with steep slopes that comes through the right-hand side of the page. All right, so the last thing I would point out on this before we go to the next video is the trees in the very bottom of the page are the ones I pointed out in the first video that would remain directly in front of the interconnect pad. You can also see there's another group of trees approximately halfway between the site and Everly's houses. There's another row of trees beyond Everly, right on the property line, with the high school. And then there's also this large wooded area, on the high school property as well, directly adjacent to the high school building.
I have a question. You stated that if you moved it to southwest, you would be encroaching on setbacks from other properties. Is that the right way?
Correct, so there's a stream valley, directly west of the pad, so they're pretty steep slopes, so you can't move it just a little bit to the west. If we moved it all the way to the opposite side of the property, we start encroaching on the setbacks of the neighboring properties.
How far? You're encroaching, are you encroaching 100 feet or 500 foot setback? So how close are you getting to that?
So I don't have those exact numbers. I mean, we could pull the other screen up and show you again if you would like to. Yeah, let's review the last drone footage and then we'll go back to that plan if that works. All right, so this last video we have is actually going to be a flight from essentially the corner of the interconnect pad heading towards the high school, just to show you some of the existing features that are between the site and the high school, and to give you an idea on the distance there. To start off, this tree in the very left side of the video, again, is part of that row of trees directly in front of the interconnect pad that would stay. The video itself here starts right near the corner of the proposed interconnect pad and flies generally in a straight line at the high school building. So right about this point, we would be over top of the existing Equitrans pipeline that Hyperion will be tapping into. And now we're headed towards the Everly barn that's in the background there.
Ryan, what height is the drone flying at?
So we started approximately 24 feet high, which is, again, is generally going to represent the top of the sound walls. And they did as best they could to fly in a straight line towards the high school. Again, as you can see, as we come over top of these buildings, the existing row of trees right on the property line between Everly and the school building. And you'll see in just a minute, the drone actually has to start climbing to get over these trees before you actually see any of the high school building or the stadium. This image we have up now is simply a shot from the second floor of the high school building, looking back towards the site. Again, this row of trees you can see in the image was the same row of trees we pointed out in the previous video. This last image, just to give you another perspective from the well site. This is actually taken in the southeast corner of the well pad. So the original videos and images were from the northeast corner, located just in the upper left corner of this sheet. From the southeast corner of the well pad, as you can see, this light white building here would be the roof of the football stadium. Actually, the high school isn't even visible from this location. So so real briefly to touch on some of the concerns of the location of the well pad. This image we have up here shows the topography of the site. So as I mentioned,
Again, this is Exhibit C.
so as I mentioned, there's really steep slopes directly west of where the well pad's located, which prevented us from shifting the pad anymore this direction. Similarly, in this corner of the pad, or in this corner of the property, we also have really steep slopes which prevent us from constructing a well pad down here.
Prevented you from shifting the pad, why?
So, generally speaking, when you're constructing a well pad, just from cuts and fills associated with grading out your pad, generally limit those to 2 horizontal to 1 vertical slope, mostly for slope stability concerns. Some of these existing slopes are nearly 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 in their existing condition. So trying to grade a flat pad the size of a well pad and then tie those slopes back into existing grade just isn't feasible on these steep slopes. So the existing well pad location is actually located on a fairly flat area. And then we just have this small fill slope on this corner and another fill slope here. And actually the shape of the well pad, the reason we don't have a square corner in the northwest corner is simply for that exact reason. The fill slopes started to what we call chase grade in order to tie back in. So we actually cut that corner of the well pad off such that we should grade this site properly. So the concern we had was setbacks from these properties along Fergus Lane. We evaluated a pad on this side of the hill. The 500-foot setback from quite a few of these properties along Fergus Lane was going to encroach on the well pad itself, which would have pushed the well pad over again onto this steep slope, which was not feasible to construct.
So put it there, guys.
Construct.
Does the board have any further questions for Mr. Daly?
Yeah. It's Commissioner Walls. Yeah, hello. Are they gonna be extracting any kind of like coal, in the process of, developing the well pads?
Yes, so there is an existing coal seam, that is the Redstone coal seam, that outcrops basically all the way along Route 51 here, and then comes around right where this cut slope is proposed. So we do have an incidental coal extraction permit under review with the DEP in order for Olympus to remove that coal as part of their construction.
Okay, can I ask a couple follow-up questions on that? What will you do with the coal?
So that'll all be laid out in the permit. Because the coal here is marketable, that's why we're required to get the DEP approval to remove it. So that coal will be removed and taken to an approved processing facility. So they're not going to be able to keep that coal on site or use it as a trash. Well, to be honest, I don't know if they can actually sell this quantity of coal. A lot of times in these situations, the operators end up essentially hauling it off site, essentially giving it to these processing facilities.
And, well, kind of like last question, in the removal of the coal, is there any like, and again, I guess this might be in your applications, is there like, dust mitigation? And if so, what kind of dust mitigation would you use during the construction to prevent dust from getting to the school to be breathed by people, keep up the gateway?
Right.
Thank you.
So again, not just related to the coal itself, but as far as the entire construction of the site is concerned, Olympus would be required to maintain dust control. Again, I think one of the operations people can speak to the specifics of what they employ for those operations. but they would, be required to employ some sort of dust mitigation efforts here. And again, specific to the coal extraction, you know, the coal specifically is located, directly adjacent to Route 51. And again, the topography between, the well pad, and the, Route 51 is uphill the entire way. So there's a very large, elevation difference between the top of the hill and where the coal will be extracted.
That's the only area that will be extracted from?
Correct.
Commissioner. Thank you.
Above our ordinance of 1,500 feet, is there any recommendations by state, federal agencies about how far something like this should be away from a public school or,
So to my knowledge, the only state setback requirement, would be 500 feet from the well bore itself to, protect the structure.
that's,
You don't even know.
Excuse me,
I mean, they, not on an ordinance part, is there any recommendations, like, not law, but
Yes, there is, from the
okay,
University.
excuse me, ma'am, thank you.
Sorry.
Please no outbursts, thank you. I keep order.
I say no, not that I'm aware of, but, you know, with my expertise here.
Yeah, please no outbursts. We're trying to create a record, so it has to be orderly, so please, no outbursts. Any other questions for this witness? From the commissioners? Okay.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh,
So that 500-foot setback you were talking about, where that coal seam is, how far of a distance is that from the school? Okay, if that well pad's 2,000, you would think that would be 3,500 feet?
But I would say definitely further than that, we get the numbers here. Yes. From the edge of the well pad, down to the landowner's residence is approximately, 1,900 feet. And then I believe it's another 700 or 800 feet, down the road from there. So you're talking,
Almost a mile from the school.
you're talking close to a mile, yeah, from the school.
Okay. And so the setbacks that you were talking about too, is well, on the opposite end, you said it was 2,000, so you're saying that the current setbacks that this proposal has is 4 times greater than what the state recommends at 500 feet?
Yeah, over 4 times, correct.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions from the commissioners for this witness? Okay, as discussed, we're gonna hold cross-examination on this witness until after your second witness, Mr. Lucas, so I'll let you proceed.
Yes, at this point, I'm going to pass the microphone to my co-counsel, Kathy Kondo, who's going to present Dr. Chris Long as a
You still need the lights down, Mr. Lucas?
He's gonna use the power.
Okay.
it okay to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. Just.
I do.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
It's Christopher Long.
Dr. Long, I have handed out a hard copy of your CV, so we're not going to go over your qualifications in great depth. But could you start by telling us what your educational background is?
Yes, I'll start with it's my first degree. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in Chemistry and Environmental Studies from Bowdoin College. I have a Master of Science degree in Environmental Engineering from MIT, and I have a doctoral degree in Environmental Health from the Harvard School of Public Health.
What is your current occupation?
I'm a toxicologist and human health risk assessor.
And for whom do you work?
I work for Gradient, which is an environmental and health science consulting company based in Boston.
Do you hold any professional certifications?
Yes, I do. I'm board certified as a toxicologist.
And do you have any particular areas within toxicology that you specialize in?
Yes, I specialize in exposure assessment, in particular as related to indoor and outdoor air quality, and I also specialize in inhalation risk assessment.
Have you done any published work with respect to potential health hazards from monitored air quality around unconventional oil and gas facilities?
Yes, I have two publications specific to air quality around oil and gas development. One is a review paper that I published with colleagues at Gradient a few years ago in the Journal of Air and Waste Management Association. The second is a paper that I published with colleagues at Gradient about a year or so ago in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology. And I'll be talking about that specific study a little bit there.
At this time, I would offer Dr. Chris Long as an expert in air quality and environmental health with expertise in exposure assessment, indoor-outdoor air pollution, and inhalation risk assessment and toxicology.
Is there anyone who has party status who would object to the admission of this witness as an expert in air quality?
I do.
Okay, please step forward, sir.
Charles Sawyer.
Stand up, please come up here, sir.
Yes, sir.
Would you like to ask the witness any questions? Please up. Yeah, please, your name, sir.
My name's Charles Sawyer, live in 1980, Scenery Travel District.
Ask the witness questions if you will, sir.
Yes, sir. I hear all this stuff about lawyers and air pollution. I worked at Clark, U.S. Steel, National Steel, and you're gonna tell me everything's clean here. The kids live in there.
Sir, this is strictly on his qualifications as a witness. So it's his training and expertise in this area. So if you have questions on those areas particularly, you'll have an opportunity to address his actual testimony if you want. Right now, it's merely his qualifications as an expert.
What is your qualification?
He just went over. Okay. No further questions. Does anybody else who has party status object to the admission of this witness as an expert in air quality? Mr. Taylor?
Scott Taylor. Do you hear me? Scott Taylor, representing Protect Elizabeth Township. I'm objecting to this gentleman, well, I can't say I'm total objecting. I'm asking what you are going to be presenting and testifying to. Is it specific to Olympus and their operations, or is this in general?
It's in general. It's about air quality monitoring that's been conducted in the Marcellus Shale region, so other parts of Pennsylvania predominantly.
Understood. And we object in general that this testimony not be given because it's not specific to this location or Olympus.
If I may.
Go ahead.
Sure. Dr. Dr. Long is going to testify about a body of data that exists with respect to emissions from unconventional oil and gas development, and through that show that the emissions from this proposed site are not going to create a health hazard to the community, which, as I understand it, is one of the concerns that the community has raised, and I believe Olympus would like to hopefully try to alleviate those concerns.
Yeah, I agree that those are concerns which have been addressed. I think the testimony is relevant to the operations, and I'm going to overrule that specific objection. Does anybody else who has party status?
Ryan, that please to.
Sure, if you want to rebut, yeah, if you want to rebut, Mr. Taylor.
To go forward with this objection, historically, anytime we have had opportunity to cross-examine anybody from Olympus, we've been limited to Olympus, to that very specific site right here in Elizabeth Township. Nothing in general. It could be this site. We don't know that. He hasn't studied it. The site does not exist.
Yeah, I think that this time we're only addressing his expert status to be able to testify on those things. If you want to object in terms of his testimony, you'll have that opportunity as well. Thank you, sir. Anybody else who has party status object to the admission of this witness as an expert? Okay, there being none, I'll accept his admittance as an expert in air quality.
Dr. Long, could you begin by giving us some context with respect to how air monitoring is used in order to determine any potential hazards from any particular source?
Sure. I just have some general insights that I'd like to share regarding when you view air monitoring data, such as collected nearby to oil and gas activity, how and when it represents potential air exposures, community level exposures. One of the first considerations is pollutants that I'll be talking about, namely fine particulate matter, generally referred to as PM2.5, air toxics like benzene. These are ubiquitous in indoor and outdoor air, whether you're nearby to oil and gas development activity or somewhere else, such as in Boston. They're commonly detected both in indoor and outdoor air. So simply detecting them at an air monitoring site nearby to oil and gas development activity doesn't mean that that's the source. These are commonly detected air-driven species. Secondly, you need to consider where the data are collected, and that factors into whether they represent community level air exposures to oil and gas related emissions. Namely, data that's collected on a well pad or occupational exposure data, those aren't generally representative of community level exposures. This is because air concentrations diminish rapidly as you move away from an air emission source. Another consideration is the relevance of data to a possible exposure period. By this, I mean that data collected over a period of minutes to hours, that may be representative of an episodic short-term peak exposure, but that isn't necessarily representative of a long-term exposure. When you're talking about a long-term chronic exposure, you like to see data that's collected over months, if not years. So these are just some considerations as you look at and interpret air quality data to represent exposure. Just to further kind of build up that idea, this slide shows some common sources of exposure to some air pollutants associated with oil and gas activity. I'd like to focus in particular on benzene and PM2.5. There are any number of common indoor and outdoor sources to both of these air pollutants. Any combustion source, whether it's our motor vehicles, whether it's wood burning, tobacco smoke, that's going to be a source of both benzene and PM2.5. Other common sources of fine particulates indoors include cooking activities, cleaning activities. Again, any combustion source, such as candles, are a source of fine particulate matter. But just to bolster the point, These are commonly present and detected both in indoor and outdoor air. The next slide shows, this is a slide from a paper published by US EPA investigators, and it illustrates the point that short-term elevated exposures to PM2.5 are common, both indoors and outdoors. I know it's probably hard for all of you to see this slide. The axis that shows concentration goes from 0 up to 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter. Some of the peaks that are shown here are from cooking activities. There's a peak here from being nearby to car vehicle exhaust. Commonly exposure levels can be hundreds, if not thousands of micrograms per cubic meter from just common activities.
Were you able to look at the existence of air monitoring data that has been accumulated in areas of unconventional oil and gas development in the Marcellus Shale region?
Yes, I've reviewed a number of data sets, some of which I'll talk about in the next few slides.
Go ahead, if you could.
Here's the next slide. This provides just a general overview of Marcellus Shale air quality data. In subsequent slides, I'll be talking about some specific air quality monitoring efforts and data. In general, there's a rich nucleus of air quality data available for the Marcellus Shale region. These data encompass a comprehensive set of air pollutants, including what are known as US EPA criteria air pollutants. PM2.5 is an EPA criteria air pollutant. They include also air toxics, which include benzene. The data are available from a number of different sources. They include regulatory agency monitoring programs and studies. In particular, I will talk about from Pennsylvania DEP. Data have been published in peer-reviewed studies in the scientific literature. There are also a number of reports available, publicly available on the internet of air quality data in the Marcellus Shale region. A lot of these data sets are multi-year records of data. Some of them go from baseline, prior to development of a nearby oil and gas well, and they go through each development phase with data collected through the production phase. So the data are available over short-term measurement periods. They're available over long-term periods as well. As I mentioned, they're data specific to different well development phases.
If you could start by reviewing with us the PADEP air monitoring data that has been collected in areas of unconventional oil and gas development.
Yes, I'll start with some Pennsylvania DEP data. I'll start with talking about Pennsylvania DEP efforts to monitor PM2.5 in shale gas areas. PM2.5 is a focus of air quality monitoring by the state, both in shale gas areas as well as other areas within the state. I'm just going to go through some of the locations of PADEP PM2.5 monitors in shale gas areas. I know it's hard for everyone to see, but generally in the center of these maps, there's a yellow star. That's the location of the Pennsylvania DEP air quality monitor. And then kind of all around the air quality monitor, as you'll see in these figures, are red dots, which represent active unconventional oil and gas well pads. I'll start with the Holbrook monitor, which is in Greene County. The nearest active unconventional natural gas well is about a quarter-mile away. Within a 3-mile radius of this air quality monitor, there are 65 active unconventional natural gas wells. Going on to the next slide, this shows this Wanda monitor in Bradford County. This monitor is classified by Pennsylvania DEP as being downwind of natural gas production facilities. The nearest active unconventional gas well is about 0.2 miles from this air air quality monitor. There are approximately 23 active wells within a 3-mile radius of the monitor. Moving to the next slide. This shows the Tioga County PM 2.5 monitor. It's classified by Pennsylvania DEP as being for monitoring of criteria air pollutants, including PM 2.5, nearby to natural gas production facilities. The nearest active unconventional gas well is less than 0.5 miles from this monitor. And there are approximately 45 active unconventional wells within the 3-mile radius of the monitor. The next monitor is known as the Houston Monitor in Washington County. This was specifically cited by Pennsylvania DEP for monitoring downwind of a large natural gas processing facility. You can see from the figure, the nearest active unconventional gas well is less than 0.5 miles from this monitoring site. There are approximately 90 active unconventional wells within a 3-mile radius of the monitor. As I mentioned, there's a large natural gas processing facility. There are also compressor stations within close proximity of this monitoring site. This is the Uniontown monitoring site in Fayette County. It was part of Pennsylvania DEP activities in the last few years to expand the PM 2.5 monitoring network in areas of shale gas activity. The nearest active unconventional gas well is about 1.2 miles away, and there are approximately 30 active unconventional gas wells within the 3-mile radius of the monitor. This slide shows the New Milford PM 2.5 monitoring site in Susquehanna County. This was also added by Pennsylvania DEP in the last few years as part of the efforts to expand PM 2.5 monitoring in shale gas areas. The nearest active unconventional gas well is about 0.3 miles away, and there are approximately 136 active unconventional wells within the 3-mile radius of this monitor. This slide shows the Strongstown monitor in Indiana County. This was added in late 2020 by Pennsylvania DEP to the monitoring network. The nearest active unconventional gas well is at about 3.5 miles away from this monitoring site. This is almost the last one. This is the Slatisburg monitor in Lycoming County. This was also added in recent years by Pennsylvania DEP as part of its efforts to expand PM 2.5 monitoring in areas of shale gas activity. The nearest active unconventional gas well is about 1.5 miles away from this monitor, and there are approximately 16 active unconventional wells within a 3-mile radius of the monitor. This is the last one. It was the 9th Pennsylvania DEP monitoring PM 2.5 monitoring site in shale gas areas. It's the Tuckhonic monitor in Wyoming County. The nearest active unconventional gas well is about 0.1 miles away from this monitor. There were 110 active unconventional natural gas wells within a 3-mile radius.
And were you able to look at the results from these monitors? And do you have a slide that shows that?
Yes, I did, and I do have a slide which is shown here.
And before you go through the slide, is the information from these monitors that you used available to the public on the PADEP website?
Yes, it is. It's available both on the Pennsylvania DEP website as well as the US EPA Air Data website.
Okay, I know the slides can be a little hard to see on the screen, but if you could walk us through what this slide shows.
Yes, I will try to walk you through. This slide shows 4 years of hourly PM 2.5 monitoring data for the 9 monitors that I've previously talked about as being in shale gas areas. These are the 9 graphs on the left with the data shown in blue. On the right are hourly PM2.5 data for 3 other Pennsylvania DEP PM2.5 monitors that are in areas without shale gas activity.
And just so we're clear, the 3 graphs that are in areas without oil and gas development activity, are they in a more kind of brownish, beigeish color?
I have an objection to this testimony.
Please come up, ma'am.
Me.
She's a party staff.
Joelle Whiteman.
Your objection, Ms. White?
My objection is that this testimony is not relevant to this specific site. No testimony is being offered that is specific to Olympus energy sites or a site for this conditional use.
Yes, as we indicated earlier, Dr. Long is going to tie this together at the end, specifically, not to preview coming attractions, but he's going to testify about the type of air monitoring that Olympus is then going to testify they are willing to do with respect to this, this site. And so in order to understand the impact of that, or the information that we believe that's going to provide to the community, all of this information is relevant to that. So that alone makes it relevant to the Olympus site. As I stated previously, it's my understanding that the community has expressed concern. If I suppose if all of the objectors are willing to stipulate that they have no concerns, no health and safety concerns with respect to the school, then perhaps this isn't necessary, but I don't believe that such a stipulation is likely forthcoming.
Do you have any data on Olympus sites?
No, I'm not presenting data for Olympus sites.
Exactly.
One objection at a time. Response to that?
No, I mean, my response would be the same that I already gave. I was just gonna,
It's going to tie.
it's going to tie in with respect to the monitoring.
Proposed site.
Yes.
Okay, I'll give it some leeway. I'd like to see how that ties in. Go ahead, your objection then. Your name first. Your name first.
Sandy Steffen. Doctor, with all due respect, the only slide that I heard you indicate that you had dated information for was 3 slides ago that said September of 2020 or late 2020.
So
I'm curious of the dates of all this information that was just recently presented here.
I think that we're getting cross-examination out of turn here. I don't think asking this witness questions about what he's testified to or what he's going to be
I think
testifying
there's an
to.
objection to overall relevance is what I'm gathering, that this testimony that he's giving isn't relevant to this site. Your response to that, as I understand it, is he's going to tie in together. You're going to explain how this background data, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I'm hearing now, that the background data is going to tie in at the end. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. If that's the case, I would like to hear how it's going to tie in, but I'm interested.
Sure.
But I think, so I will overrule the objections based on that, but I'm saying, let's tie in the testimony to why it's relevant to the proposed data.
Would you prefer that we jump ahead of that and then come back to this?
Not if you don't think it's it's your witness, it's
Okay.
your foundation, you lay it. I'm just saying it needs to tie in.
Okay,
I do
certainly.
have a follow-up question to that related to the relevancy. I mean, it's just,
Is it another objection other than
well,
relevance?
it's a twofold, with Doctor as a professional in his field, I'm just curious, is your experience or any of the research that you've done as to the findings of the Attorney General's office of the PHET?
I think that is getting into cross-examination.
Okay.
You'll have that opportunity. But yeah, in terms of the relevance of the testimony, I'm gonna overrule those objections. Please continue.
I think that where we were before this is just clarifying that what I'm calling brown or beige graphing is from monitors, PM 2.5 monitors that are not in in any oil and gas development area, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's actually supposed to be green, but that's not supposed to be green. Those graphs are on the right, the 3 on the furthest right. Those are for the Rentsville monitor in Adams County, the Carlisle monitor in Cumberland County, and the York County monitor. So those are, all 3 of those are in areas without shale gas activity.
And as you can compared the monitors in the shale gas activity areas with the ones outside of the shale gas activity areas. What were your conclusions as shown on these graphs?
Right, what you can see is that there's hour-to-hour variability in PM2.5 concentrations in both sets of monitors, both of those within areas with shale gas activity and areas without shale gas activity. In general, levels of PM2.5 in the areas without shale gas activity are higher than those that have been measured in areas with shale gas activity, as shown on this slide. Like I said, this is 4 years of data. It's data from, I believe, I think it is 2016, actually 2017 through 2021. It's 4 years of data. If you look at the 4-year average concentrations for each of these monitors, those 4-year average concentrations are higher for the monitors in areas without shale gas activity.
Just another question, please. The charts on the right, are those similar types of areas? Like everything I'm assuming on the left is all suburban rural areas. The graphs on the right, are they suburban rural areas as well? I wouldn't want to say compared to the urban area.
I believe it's a mix of some suburban and some more urban areas in the areas without shale gas activity.
But the ones on the left wouldn't be urban, the ones on the right are urban areas.
Correct, those are more rural areas, yes.
And were you able to look at whether PADEP has done monitoring with respect to air toxics, including VOCs, in areas with oil and gas development?
Yes, if we could go to the next slide. Currently, there's Pennsylvania DEP air toxics data available for 3 monitors in areas with shale gas activity. These include the Houston monitor that I previously discussed. In addition, the Olympus monitor in Wyoming County that's shown here, where the nearest active unconventional natural gas well is about a mile away. And there are 48 active wells within a 3-mile radius. The third monitor is shown on the next slide. This is the Springville monitor in Susquehanna County, which had the nearest active unconventional natural gas well was about a quarter-mile away. There are 180 active wells within a 3-mile radius of this monitor. So there are 3 air toxics monitors in shale gas activities with data currently available from Pennsylvania DEP.
And were you able to take a look at the publicly available information with respect to these monitors?
I did, and I'm focusing here on benzene, which is an air toxic measured at these monitors. Again, the 3 plots on the left are for the monitors in areas with shale gas activity, the Houston, Mahoobany, and Springville monitors. On the right are data for the Orentsville and York County monitors, where air toxics, including benzene, are also measured. This graph shows a number of years of data. It shows, for both sets of air toxics monitors, very low levels of benzene are commonly measured, below 1 part per billion. The scale here on the plots goes up 1 part per billion.
And did the PADEP also, in addition to this monitoring, do a long-term air monitoring project in Washington County, Pennsylvania?
Yes, they did, and that's summarized here on this slide. This is in addition to the routine ambient air quality monitoring that Pennsylvania DEP does. This study was conducted between July of 2012 and December of 2013 to determine any chronic or long-term risks to the public from individual or multiple shale gas sources. There were 4 monitoring sites that were established for measurement of a suite of different air pollutants in this area of Washington County. This area of Washington County has a large natural gas processing facility compressor stations, as well as natural gas well pads. The figure here shows in the center the Beddings Road. This is one of the 4 monitoring sites. The name of this monitor was changed. This is now the Houston monitor, where they continued to do routine ambient air monitoring. So data were collected at 4 different sites, a suite of different air pollutants. There were 2 reports written analyzing and interpreting these data. A report by Pennsylvania DEP, and then a report by the U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, ATSDR. Their general conclusion was that low air pollutant concentrations were measured below levels of health concern.
Are you also familiar with air monitoring that's been done by the Allegheny County Health Department in the vicinity of wells in Allegheny County?
Yes, I am, and I've looked at that data and put together a couple of slides talking about the data. The Allegheny County Health Department collected long-term air monitoring data at 2 special purpose air monitoring sites nearby to well pads during all phases of well pad development of the nearest wells. These sites included the Imperial Point monitoring site, which is within a residential neighborhood about 0.3 miles downwind of the closest well pad site during its development. The focus of the monitoring was volatile organic chemicals, or VOCs, including benzene. Over 160 24-hour air samples were collected for VOC analysis between March 2014 and May 2017 at this Imperial Point location. Again, I know it's hard to see, but there's a wind rose shown in the upper right corner of the map showing the location of the Imperial Point monitor. And it shows winds typically from the west and southwest, which would have blown air emissions from this site towards the monitoring location. The second, the Allegheny County Health Department Special Purpose Monitoring Site was known as the Deer Lakes Monitor. This was located within a county park about 0.9 miles from the closest well pad site. A different air monitoring approach was taken at this site, where 14-day air samples were continuously collected from June 2014 to March 2017 and analyzed for a number
I
of
object
VOC
again
species.
to relevance. This has nothing to do with this application.
I'm gonna overrule that. I'm assuming this is getting somewhere, so I'm gonna give a leeway based on my understanding that this is going to tie together.
Yes.
I would like to see it sort of tie together.
I mean, we can jump ahead, but I feel like it's gonna be difficult to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it might be a good idea to jump ahead a few slides. But, I mean, overall, Allegheny County Health Department authored a report interpreting the VOC air quality data collected from these 2 locations and concluded that below VOC levels, below levels of health concern that were consistently measured. As a result, they discontinued air monitoring at these sites in 2017.
And if we can turn now to an overview of the study that you did with respect to the Fort Cherry School. And before we get into the details of this study, let me ask you a question, and then we'll circle back to a little bit more. But is it your opinion, based on all of your expertise and experience and your review of the air monitoring that's been done to this point, that air monitoring of a type that you're going to describe to us here was done out at the Fort Cherry, in the vicinity of the Fort Cherry School, would be helpful to this site if Olympus were to do it, in order to determine whether there are any concerns that are being seen with respect to either VOCs or PM 2.5 in the vicinity of this school with respect to this site?
Yes, that is my conclusion, is that an air monitoring study similar to what was done here, where PM 2.5 was measured continuously at a location between the well pad site and the school, and then volatile organic compounds, VOCs, air samples were collected for analysis of the suite of different VOCs as part of the study. And yeah, kind of the bottom line is that I think a type of air monitoring like this would be useful here in this case.
And if we can just put a little more meat on the bones with that introduction to the type of air monitoring that was done here, its results, in other words, what kind of data came out of that, and why you would recommend it here.
Yes, I'd like to talk about this study and provide some context. This study was specifically conducted to determine whether well pad operations may contribute to ambient, when I say ambient air, that means outdoor air concentrations of potential health concern at a nearby school. It was conducted in an area of Washington County with extensive Marcellus Shale development. This figure shows the well pad site is indicated with a blue circle. What you can't see because it's in blue writing that is illegible right now there are other well pad sites in close proximity as well. I think there are 3 of them that are labeled in blue labeling. Around 2 years of measurements were collected at 3 monitoring sites nearby to the study well pad site. You can see that 2 of these monitoring sites, sites 1 and 2, were located at different distances between the well pad site and the school. And then a 3rd site was located upwind of the well pad site.
And can you explain why, if you're doing a study like this, locating a monitor not only downwind but also upwind of the well pad is important?
It's important for trying to determine whether what's being measured at the monitors between the well pad site and the school campus may be coming from the well pad site, or whether they may be coming from other local and regional sources. So it's important to have monitors both downwind and upwind in order to better interpret the data.
And if you can continue with more detail about the monitoring that was done at Fort Cherry.
What is your objection?
I want to talk about, you mentioned long-term and short-term exposure. All of these studies are talking about 4 years. I would like to see some long-term studies that have been done.
Yeah, you're gonna have an opportunity to cross-examine him, so I think you can ask him that at that time. Yeah, you'll be able to ask him those questions, absolutely. You'll have a right under cross-examination. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question?
Mr. Grice, do you have an objection? What is your objection?
My objection is basically, is this not sort of like you're saying, the fact that there's no one there from...
It's his study.
I'm saying from the Allegheny County, there's no one there to go ahead and ask questions of. I understand that this is study, it's his study that was paid for by Range Resources, so I understand that. So what I'm saying is there's nobody who is going to be able to ask a question the other direction over here, because he's the person who pulled together data that other people from Allegheny County or Washington County could have said something differently, but they're not here to say something.
Dr. Long has been qualified as an expert, and as an expert, he's allowed to offer evidence with respect to data on which he would normally rely.
Yeah, that's how that works, Mr. Grice. So I'm going to overrule your objection. But you will have the opportunity to cross-examine him about his data, certainly, as a party. Go ahead.
If you could continue with the details surrounding the monitoring that was done at Fort Cherry.
Right. I can't remember if I mentioned, but around 2 years of measurements were collected as part of the study during all phases of development of the study well pad site and production of natural gas and natural gas liquids. The next slide provides an overview of some of the air sampling methods that were used. The measurements focus on PM2.5, VOCs, and then meteorological parameters.
And if I can stop you for a moment, would you recommend that monitoring include meteorological parameter monitoring?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Both wind speed and wind direction data are very useful in trying to determine where measured concentrations may be coming from, so whether they're coming from a wellhead site or from somewhere else.
I'm sorry, if you can continue.
Sure. So continuous PM2.5 measurements were made at one of the monitoring sites, specifically Site 1, which was the closest to the school campus. In total, more than 15,000 hourly PM2.5 measurements were made during the study time period. Air canister samples were collected over 24-hour sampling periods at each of the 3 monitoring sites every 6th day for laboratory analysis of 58 different VOC species. So across the sampling period and the number of VOCs that were analyzed, there were over 18,000 individual VOC concentration measurements. The monitoring was conducted between December 2016 and October 2018. I think I mentioned, there were 3 air monitoring sites. I didn't mention the specific distances. They ranged in distance from 1,000 to 2,800 feet from the well pad site. If we could go to the next slide. The next slide, I'm going to present several of the findings from the study. Based on the meteorological measurements that were conducted at 2 of the sites, Sites 1 and Site 2, the prevailing local winds were from the west and southwest. So in other words, typically, the winds did not blow air emissions from the direction of the well pad towards the school campus. Although less frequent, winds blowing from the south and southeast that would direct any air emissions from the well pad to the monitoring sites down between the well pad and the school, they did occur during each of the well activity periods. As a result, we conducted wind stratified analyses to focus on air sampling data where there were frequent south and southeast winds. For south and southeast winds, there were some small increases in PM2.5 concentrations at Site 1, and for some VOC concentrations at Sites 1 and 2. However, what we found was that there are similar increases in VOC concentrations at Site 3 with south and southeast winds, meaning that local and regional sources to the south and southeast may have been contributing to these air pollutant concentration increases.
And this may be an obvious question, but is this the kind of information that you can gather from a monitoring program like you just described was done?
Yes, it is. I mean, this illustrates the benefits of collecting continuous PM2.5 data, collecting air samples for individual VOC analysis, also for collecting continuous meteorological data.
And do you believe that it would be particularly important in a region where you do have other contributing sources to air pollution, like in the Mon Valley, that you have this kind of monitoring and data available to analyze?
Yes, I do. I think it's important to have not only a monitor between the well pad and the schools, but also to have an upwind monitor, and then also to collect meteorological data.
If you can continue, please.
This slide summarizes PM2.5 measurements collected from Site 1. The plot shows 24-hour average concentrations for the entire monitoring period, so through development of the well pad into the production phase. Overlaid on this plot are data from the Pennsylvania DEP Florence monitor, which is about 10 miles or so to the northwest. This monitor is considered by Pennsylvania DEP to measure regional PM2.5 air quality. What you can see is that the concentrations at both sites go up and down together and are very similar in terms of concentration levels, indicating that local and regional transport was the dominant contributor to PM2.5 concentrations measured at Site 1 between the well pad and the school. Also, what you can see, like I said, these are 24-hour average PM2.5 concentrations. At the top of the plot is a dashed red line representing US EPA 24-hour National Ambient Air Quality Standard of 35 micrograms per cubic meter. All measured 24-hour average PM2.5 concentrations at Site 1 were well below 35 micrograms per cubic meter. If we go to the next slide, let's summarize some of the findings for VOCs, volatile organic chemicals, compounds. The majority of the 58 target VOC species were either detected infrequently or not detected at all. This was despite using very sensitive analytical methods with low detection limits. Only 14 VOCs were consistently detected. Defined consistently detected as detection frequencies greater than 75%. Some of these are known to be associated with oil and gas development air emissions. They include acetone, benzene, ethanol, methanol, and hexane, propylene, toluene. As I've talked about, they each have other common sources as well. About half of the other frequently detected VOCs are commonly measured due to regional and global air quality, so likely not associated with well pad emissions. In general, detected concentrations were low. Median concentrations were frequently less than 1 part per billion. Statistical testing showed few consistent patterns with respect to measurements across the VOCs. For analyses by monitoring site, well activity periods, and wind direction, overall providing little evidence that well pad air emissions were consistent sources of measured VOCs at the 3 air monitoring sites.
And again, perhaps to state the obvious, but the kind of VOC monitoring that you described earlier was done in this situation allowed for the analysis that you've just gone over there on this slide.
Correct. It allowed for the analysis of specific VOC species, including, as I mentioned, benzene in particular. We could go to the next slide. One of the key parts of our study, because we measured individual VOC species, we were able to compare them to both acute and chronic health-based air comparison values to understand whether the measured levels may be associated with either acute or chronic health risks. This plot...
And please stop just 1 second. Can you tell us the difference between an acute health risk and a chronic health risk?
Yes. Here, my acute health risk for comparing 24-hour concentrations, the maximum measured 24-hour concentrations, to an acute health-based air comparison value. An air comparison value for that same short-term 24, it's appropriate for a 24-hour sampling period. And what we found is that maximum 24-hour VOC concentrations were all below health-based acute air comparison values for all periods of well development and production. There's no evidence of acute health concerns for the measured data. This plot shows the data for benzene, what are known as the VTEC species, benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylenes. Again, I know it's hard to read, but the punchline is that the measured concentrations for each of the well development periods are well below acute health-based air comparison values.
And the VOC sampling and program that you described earlier would allow one, with respect to the Olympus well pad, if that kind of monitoring were done, to do the same sort of analysis with respect to potential acute health risks.
Yes, it would. In collecting data over 24-hour periods allows for comparison with acute health-based air comparison values. In addition, collecting data, as I'll show in the next slide, in this study collected data over about a 2-year period. When you average these data, they are appropriate for comparison with chronic health-based air comparison values. You can go to the next slide. And again, average statistics representative of longer-term exposures, they were also consistently below chronic health-based air comparison values, with the conclusion that there's no evidence of
and I think there's two more slides, but I think we'll end there, because I think it probably has explained the monitoring and what it can potentially be used for well enough at this point.
Can I ask you a question? I'm not sure how, I mean, I imagine you can answer this, but, benzene, I read about it, what is benzene? Can you help me with that?
It's a chemical species. It's a volatile species. Essentially, it's 6 carbons, double bonds, and hydrogens attached. It's used. I mean, it's a product of any combustion source, as I talked about. It's present in motor vehicle exhaust. It's a constituent of gasoline. It's produced, result of a whole variety of different industrial processes. So it's commonly found. It's present in this room. You would be able to measure benzene concentrations. It's commonly present in both indoor and outdoor air.
Is that classified as is that chemical, I guess?
It is a chemical.
Okay. Is that a chemical that is being used in the fracking, or is that something that is created used in the fracking?
From my understanding, it's not being used. It's emitted during. Well, I guess it's present in vehicle exhaust. So if there are pumps, generators, if those are diesel powered, that benzene could be present in air emissions. So it could have. It's not purposely, from my understanding, used as a result.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, is benzene a natural component of all crude oil?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And therefore, any products that are the result of crude oil or use crude oil in some way have the potential to have benzene in them as a natural part of the product. Is that right, or?
That's right. That's why
Okay.
it's present. Yes.
Okay.
I have an objection.
I think their testimony is great.
Well, there are two additional slides that are being entered into the record. The public has a right to see them.
Okay, I was just trying to save time, but we'll be happy to look at the last two.
I'll sustain that objection, ma'am. Go ahead.
Sure. If you can go ahead and show us the last two slides.
Yes, this slide is just a summary of key findings from this study that was done.
And I am going to stop you there for 1 second. I don't know that we've put this in the record. Was this study that you've just gone over with us long 2021 published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal?
Yes, it was, and the title page for that manuscript is shown here on the right. It was published in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology, which is a peer-reviewed scientific publication.
Okay, I'm sorry. If you can just go on and share with us the key findings from the study.
Right. I think I've already said some of these, but findings indicated the study well pad to be a source of small transient contributions of PM2.5 in some VOCs at the monitoring sites. That being said, as I mentioned, measured concentrations of both PM2.5 and VOC species were consistently below acute and chronic health-based air comparison values. As a result, there was an absence of evidence of either daily average or longer-term air quality impacts of potential health concern at the monitoring sites and at the school associated with the well pad air emissions. Other analysis that we did that I haven't spoken about tonight, but is covered in the paper, we compared the measured concentrations to long-term average concentrations considered to represent background in Washington County in areas more distant from local natural gas development. And we found that the measured concentrations were consistent and often lower than background concentrations.
And I think there's a final slide where this is another air monitoring study that was done earlier in the Fort Cherry area, if you want to briefly go over that study.
Sure, this is an earlier study that was also published in a peer-reviewed journal. The first author on this was Mastery. This paper was published in 2016. It was conducted on behalf of the local school board in 2011 through 2012 during development of a different well pad nearby to the Fort Cherry School. There are 2 air monitoring sites, both about a half mile from the well pad under development. One of these monitoring sites was at the Fort Cherry High School. VOC sampling occurred over an approximately 3-month period during development phases, including the hydraulic fracturing and flaring phases. And overall, no measured VOC concentrations exceeded health-based benchmarks.
And just to be clear, a health-based benchmark is what? What's the significance of a constituent not exceeding a health-based benchmark?
A health-based benchmark is essentially a level, if you're below this level, there's not going to be an increased risk of either non-cancer or cancer health impacts. And something to bear in mind, even if you exceed a health-based benchmark, there are a number of safety and uncertainty factors that are incorporated into these benchmarks. So exceeding them also doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be increased risk due to safety factors and uncertainty factors. You're still going to be well above exposure levels at which adverse health impacts have been observed.
And one last question on the health-based benchmarks. Are they put together, first of all, by government agencies, and secondly, are they meant to be protective not only of the normal person, but of extra sensitive individuals like the elderly or children, etc.?
Yes, to the first question, they are put together by governmental agencies, including US EPA and ATSDR. And yes, they are intended to be protective of the general population as well as sensitive subpopulations. And this is done through the incorporation of the safety factors that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Anything further for this witness?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go down the list for the individuals with party status and ask if they have any questions for this witness. Just as a reminder, keep it within the scope of his direct testimony. So you're allowed to ask any questions with regard to anything that you testified to. I would ask that you please keep it within that scope, or else I'm sure you'll get an objection and I'll have to sustain that objection if you go outside those that isn't direct testimony. So, Ted Grice, any questions for this witness?
Yep. I think that was the first one.
Sure. Yeah, why don't you give the microphone? Do we want to hit the lights too, Greg? Thanks. Okay. It is, just, let's go off the record for 1 second. It's 9:33. We get through cross-examination on this witness. Do you want to try and do the cross, or do you just want to bump it to the next? For Mr. Daly. For Mr. Daly. Fine. You want to see how long this goes, or?
We'll see how.
Okay.
I suspect it's probably going to cut it off
After this, okay, I know we gotta get through, I know we gotta get through now, I wanted to also get. Her fingers are probably, and I'm a fast talker too, so she doesn't like when I'm talking. She's probably used to me by now. Okay, when you're ready. Okay, Mr. Bryce, go ahead.
Can I have the general question?
Please speak up, sir.
Sorry.
Yeah, come up here so she can hear you.
Okay.
Is that on?
I guess.
They're not witnesses, no, they're just cross-examining, they're parties. Yeah, no, good thought, but go ahead.
Okay, toward the fact that you're a little bit background, when you were talking, you were an expert in toxicology. Have you done any toxicology the other direction to say that there are health concerns, or has it all been this? Because when I look up to see what gradient is funded by, it it seems that they're going to prove things smart that are not the other way. So have you found things in your toxicology background that you have looked for?
Yes, and I do human health risk assessment. We found risks that exceed EPA risk criteria.
Okay, so who funds Gradient?
Gradient does work for a variety of different types of entities, but we have industrial clients, governmental clients. It's a whole range of different client types.
There's articles I go through all these things that are there that funded by the American Petroleum Institute, that's our International Carbon Black Association.
Hold on, yeah, you have to talk.
So, I'll do that again. Funded by
I had that
American
deal.
Petroleum
Slow as you can.
Institute, Navistar, and the International Carbon Black Association. This is beautiful. Whose members are subject to clean air regulations. So the concern is with the fact of how you presented it with the slant that you didn't understand that, is that I was looking to see where you've gone the other way with it by saying, yes, but we did this government study on this, or we did some other study on this that showed it was, and therefore somebody shut down. There we have it.
Object to the form of the question. It's not at least clear to me, and I want the record to be clear, whether he's asking about whether there was ever a risk assessment done by Gradient on anything, or whether he's limiting his question to oil and gas. I think when Dr. Long answered it before, he was talking generally, but I just want to make sure the record's clear whether.
Yeah, if you could rephrase it, Ted, are you asking specifically with regard to oil and gas development?
Yes.
Or are you asking, in general, has he ever found that there is a
Specifically
violation?
in oil and gas.
Okay. You understand the question?
I think I do. I guess one preface is, I mean, this work was published in a peer-reviewed scientific publication, so there wasn't a slant. I mean, it's a scientific publication. We analyzed the data as it was. But in terms of your question, as I mentioned, one of the other publications that I have related to oil and gas development activity was a review paper of air quality data collected, a lot of which I've talked about today, collected by Pennsylvania DEP, collected by other academic researchers. As I discussed in that paper, some of those data do exceed risk-based benchmarks. However, broadly speaking, the majority of data do not.
Okay, so. I guess I'll give up the floor for now, but I do have a concern of, like, basically, he's out the door, which I'm kind of confused because we need to get him through because he's fast as hell.
He doesn't live here.
I get it, I understand that, but he's gonna be gone. If something, if during this 7 days till the next meeting, he came up with information that had somebody who was peer reviewed, so peers agree and disagree, that's how peers go. If we found information about that.
If you find sufficient evidence to recall this witness as rebuttal, I'm sure we could figure it out with the technology that we have, if that comes up.
Okay, so that would be the concern.
I think in terms of, it would have to be something, significant and material, obviously, not just something, that contradicts something he's testified to, something that would have to be significant.
Going back to my objection before though, was that there was data that was out there, the data was analyzed, but there's other people who were looking at that data and analyzed it differently. So I understand it was his research paper. I understand you were the one who looked at data and came up with a hypothesis to a conclusion, and worked your way through it. But other people got the same data and came up with different conclusions. That's what I'm.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you.
Protect Elizabeth Township. Leave that.
Alright, is this mic working? I got about 4 pages of notes, we're gonna jump around a little bit, so I apologize for jumping around. I'm gonna start with the Fort Cherry study. For that study, what specific VOCs were requested to be studied?
I assume you're referring to the Fort Cherry study that I was involved in.
Very
rather than-
specifically, the Fort Cherry study, correct, the one we just talked about.
Yes. As I mentioned, there are 58 different VOC species that were analyzed for. Those 58 VOC species matched a list that Pennsylvania DEP has routinely monitored for at air toxic sites.
All right, so you physically monitored for 58 different VOCs.
Well, to back up, air samples were collected in canisters, they were sent out to a laboratory, and then analyzed for 58 different VOC species.
What kind of canisters? Like a sumo canister?
Sumo canisters, correct.
Unfortunately, I'm very familiar with air monitoring as part of what my group does. We have a full network of monitors in the Mon Valley, working with CMU to do exactly what you're talking about. What type of monitors were used for these locations around Fort Cherry? What type of monitors were used? Low-cost monitors or some specific brand type of monitor?
So you're talking about PM2.5 then? Because in terms of VOCs, it was air samples that were then sent out for laboratory analysis for VOCs. For PM2.5, it was not a low-cost monitor. It was specifically, I want to get the model number wrong. It was a MET1 band 1020 PM2.5 monitor, which I believe is considered by EPA to be a federal equivalent method for measurement of PM2.5.
Understood. There's 58, what's the date range of this study?
The monitoring was conducted between December 2016 and October 2018, so almost a 2-year period.
Almost a 2-year period, okay. You did mention that this was like a 2-week study, and then there's some about 3 months. Was this an intermittent thing that you only monitor for 2 weeks out of a month, or was this 24/7, 365 type of deal?
I think, yeah, I don't remember talking about 2 weeks or 3 months. I mean, there was continuous. That's not my study. That's the other Fort Cherry study that was done.
I may have got mixed up. I apologize. Like I said, I'm trying to make great notes as we went through this. So with this 2-year study, nearly 2-year study, these monitors ran 24/7, 365.
The PM2.5 monitor was operated continuously 24/7, making hourly measurements of PM2.5 during the entire almost 2-year period. As I mentioned, for the VOCs, consistent with US EPA air toxic sampling methods, 24-hour air samples were collected every 6th day and sent out for VOC analysis.
Every 6 days?
Every 6th day.
For that entire 2-year period?
Correct, at the 3 sites.
And then your results are a time-weighted average over, using whatever the results were you got on every 6 days, that was averaged over those 2 years, right?
To develop an estimate of chronic exposure, yes.
All right. Through that study, do you recall seeing any peaks during that operation? Because we know the industry, fracking industry specifically, does not operate 24/7, 365 for 2 years. They're in for a couple of months and then they go somewhere else. So during that study, did you see any peaks during there that would indicate something that was triggered by operations at that point?
I mean, we had the hourly PM2.5 data. I showed that data. I mean, concentrations do go up and down over time. I mean, that type of variability is observed in areas with shale gas activity and areas without shale gas activity. And I showed the 24-hour average PM2.5 concentrations. Those were well consistently below the National Ambient Air Quality Standard of 35 micrograms per cubic meter.
Say that again, air quality standard.
National Ambient Air Quality Standard for PM2.5.
The 35. I missed it.
35 micrograms per cubic meter.
These monitors that were set up around Fort Cherry, can you describe how these things were mounted, where they were mounted,
the air sampling myself. I'd have to go back and look at my paper to see what details. The SEMA canisters, I don't believe that those were in an enclosure. Those were hung at a certain height.
Agreed, I'll take that one back. I know the summa canister, I'm familiar, you're right. You just take them out, you set them off, open the lid, plug it back up at the end. But your PM2 monitors, from what I know of this study, these things were actually put in your portable dog crates.
They do have to be put in an enclosure to protect them from the weather, from rain, from snow. But there's an air sampling inlet that pokes out of the enclosure and that samples at an appropriate height. So it's not sampling air within the enclosure.
Agreed, that's my point to the question, exactly. And again, go back, all this is weighted averages over the 2 years. This doesn't, is there anything in that study, in that report that says we had a high concentration during January, February of the year, March or April, and was this just an average over the 2 years?
No, it's both. For VOCs, we have 24-hour samples, so we looked at the data, we looked at the maximum 24-hour average concentrations. For PM2.5, we did analysis of the 24-hour average data. I have to, I mean, we certainly looked at the hourly data as well for PM2.5.
You talked about benzene. That's a known carcinogenic, correct?
It's a known carcinogen, yes.
It's also known it's heavier than air, correct? Benzene floats around 3-4 feet off the ground, not 6-8 feet off the ground, correct?
I don't think it is heavier than air, actually. Well, I guess not. It's heavier molecular weight than nitrogen. So, yeah, but I mean, from my understanding, it does disperse and mix within the air. It's not a dense gas that simply follows the ground surface.
It actually is. There are studies out there that show benzene lingers closer to the ground and is actually one of the leading cancers of childhood cancers, correct? The theory is because the children are shorter and lower to the ground, they're more susceptible to these. I don't have the study.
I would disagree with that statement.
I think at this point, the cross-examiner is testifying.
Yeah, we're getting a little beyond.
I agree. That was, you talked about the DEP, the Allegheny County Health Department doing all this monitoring, which is great. And you said a lot of the stuff is available, and I'm familiar with some of it, that it is available, especially county health departments. DEP, I'm not so familiar with. Do you know what division of the DEP handles that end of it?
I mean, they have an air monitoring website. I mean, that's where we get air available.
Where you do that. As far as the DEP and the county health department doing all this monitoring, do you know if they do anything in regard to regulating the industry as far as emissions and air quality?
Yes, I mean, generally, I believe they regulate the industry in terms of emissions, but I mean, here I focus on air quality data.
So you really don't know that answer? It's okay to say I don't know.
I don't know the specifics, but certainly that they do regulate industries like the oil and gas industry.
Okay. Out of all this study work that you put together, was any of this done on an Olympus drill site? Or in the vicinity of the Olympus drill site?
Not that I'm specifically aware of. I can't say whether an Olympus well pad site is one of the monitors within close proximity to any of the Pennsylvania DEP monitoring sites.
All right, so then I'll go back to my original objection, Mr. Rakunas, that his statement saying this is all general information. Ms. Kondo said the same thing, that it's all general information, not specific to Olympus.
I'll just rest on what I said before. I believe that Dr. Long tied it in by explaining that this is important to understand, that this kind of what monitoring can be done, what monitoring has been done, what kind of data can be collected from that monitoring. And as we're going to hear from a company witness later, he's recommending that Olympus do this monitoring here, and a company witness will testify later as to their intent in that regard.
Yeah, and I'm gonna overrule the objection because I agree, the testimony was they're recommending this type of monitoring here. That's what ties it in. They're saying they have done this at other places, they're recommending it here. So I think that's the relevance, that gets you to the relevance in my opinion.
I completely disagree. They just said they have done none of this at any other Olympus site. None of these monitors were done at any of the other.
I'm overruling your objection. They're saying they're recommending it for this site. That's why it's relevant to this application. So we can agree to disagree, but
That's where we can agree on. I've asked for monitoring on all these sites since day one.
Thanks, Russ. Do you have anything else for this witness?
For the witness, no, but I would like to.
This is cross-examination of the witness. If you have statements, there'll be another time for that.
I need to know how.
Is it a question for the witness?
All the documents that were turned over, how do I get a copy of them?
Like these reports.
We can give you.
Like the penalized.
All this stuff is supposed to be made available.
You're a party. Yeah, he's a party, so we'll make arrangements to get on his zip drive. Yeah.
We'll arrange those, scan it, and put it on
Yeah,
the
we'll
website.
get you, yeah, we'll get you.
Information, all public is.
Go ahead. You're a party, we'll get it to you.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Sandra Hearn.
You said on your chart, that one of the charts, you have short-term and you have long-term exposure. And you mentioned benzene and other chemicals and fluids. Is Fort Cherry short-term or a long-term study?
It was both, as I talked about. The
Well,
study
I saw
itself.
2 years and 4 years. Is 4 years a long-term study?
2 years? Yeah, I consider 2 years to be a long-term study, given that it was through the beginning of development of wells at the well pad site through, I believe monitoring was continued over a year during production after development had been completed. I consider that to be a long-term study, but they're both short-term. Our analyses address both short-term air quality impacts as well as long-term air quality impacts.
Do you have a 30-year study for Marcellus well drilling operations near school?
No.
What's the longest study you found?
I'd have to look at some of the Pennsylvania DEP data. I mean, some of this data have been collected for, I would say, more than 10 years of monitoring at some of those sites. I don't remember off the top of my head kind of the longest record of data nearby to shale gas activity.
Okay, so if you have a 30-plus year employee working in a school within 1,500 feet or less of an oil or gas development, you have a study. Show us the effects it might have.
What we do have is we have data over, I mean, you're talking about a 30-year period. The majority of that is going to be during the production phase.
Marcellus Shale, we have studies for Marcellus Shale near a school for a long period of time, other than 2 years or 4 years or 10 years.
I've talked about the data sets that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Cindy Schmidt, any questions for this witness?
No, she just asked the same question I was gonna ask.
Thank you. Eric Catcher, any questions for this witness?
He left.
Okay. Sandy Steffen, any questions for this witness?
studies do you think you've done on DEP collected data?
What do you mean by study?
Your analysis of the data that's been provided by DEP, as you just showed through your slides. But how many of those have you conducted?
I mentioned the review paper that we published, that included analyses of Pennsylvania DEP data.
Just volume, quantity, 50, 100, just over the course of your career.
So are we talking, I guess I don't really understand the question. Are we talking analysis of air quality data? I've done,
Okay.
any number of those. I guess.
I'll ask a different question. What is considered, how accurate do you consider data provided by the DEP while you analyze it? Do you have any other benchmark or objective information that you're able to compare to make sure that what you are interpreting is valid?
Those data undergo extensive quality assurance, quality control. They're using EPA, federal equivalent, federal reference methods. I think there are a lot of factors that ensure that those are good quality data.
Okay, the reason why I ask is much of the information that was presented was not dated. Some of it was 2011-12, some of it was 2013 and 14. A lot of that information, which is obviously over a decade old. Obviously, we have a dramatic increase in well sites. So from that information, whether it's 5, 6, 10 years ago, the statistics on the increase in well pads is over 1,000% in our area. Not just 1,000 additional well pads, but over 1,000%. So.
Ma'am, you asked a question.
I wanted to make that clear. Were you aware that there was a grand jury report that was organized by Attorney General Shapiro, and the findings, this is just a headline from attorneygeneral.gov, if you want to find sources. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection failed to protect public from hydraulic fracturing hazards. I'm just curious if you know anything about that, the study, the report, any of that findings, because that was only 2 years ago, and concluded in September of 2020. So that's my question, is are you aware of that, and has that affected your opinion of the DEP information that you have since interpreted this many years ago?
Objection on multiple grounds, testifying, reading a headline from something, but in any event, Dr. Long didn't testify about the validity of DEP's regulation of the industry. That's outside of his scope. He testified using DEP sampling data, which is something very different than what's being asked about here.
If she could I'm going to give her some leeway because she's pro se. I think what you're asking is he aware of this study from the Pennsylvania Attorney General? You said it was.
Correct. And then
Are you aware of that study, sir?
I'm aware that it exists. I do want to go back to some of the prior discussions. I mean, she discussed a number of dates. I don't think those dates are accurate.
They never see your slides.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the PM2.5 data that I presented from Pennsylvania DEP, that was for 2018 through 2021. That is recent data. So I guess I'm not sure where the
A lot of the
2013, 2014.
Oh, for Cherry, I think it was 2016 to 18. There were many points that were brought up though that were linked to 10 years old. I can grab my notes. I feel like I'm nodding. So
some of the data are older, some of the data are more recent.
do you feel that the data is accurate, that we could basically multiply that based on the number of well pads that now exist currently compared to the time when the data was coming out?
Not sure I understand the question.
If there were 10 well pads, just conversation's sake, if there were 10 well pads based on information that you interpreted, and there's now 100, how would that change your statistics? Do you have any recent information on how that applies to our area and our region with the multiplied number of well pads that come?
I think that's encompassed in the data that Pennsylvania DEP is collecting. They're collecting, for instance, PM2.5 in 9 areas with shale gas activity. They're collecting that data. I mean, they started a number of years ago. They're still collecting that data. The number of well pads is increasing. That's, any incremental air quality impacts are reflected in that data set.
So what information or what methods would you use to gather information if you had to find alternative sources other than DEP?
Alternative data sources?
Yes.
I mean, you can do literature searches to understand what's been published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. We routinely do that to understand. You do Google searches to find if there's some reports that haven't been published in the scientific literature but are available on the web. As I mentioned, the US EPA website is a source of air quality data as well.
Okay, the Attorney General's website is also a source of information. That's just why I have some concerns about the findings from there. And you as an expert, and this is nothing personal, but if any of that information has been taken into consideration, there's only 2,500 documents that was included in that, all of which, using the word land-based, I think is strong, but that's probably the Attorney General's office.
Objection, there's a question there, we're now testifying about something with respect to the Attorney General.
Yeah, I'm gonna just keep your questions.
Oh, sorry, that was long-winded, no, just the question was, is what else would you consider factual or accurate information if you were to review any of this, the findings from the grand jury report? Do you have alternative sources that you could use if you were to find that you maybe questioned some of the things that you analyzed?
Yeah, it's something that we do routinely is that we try to identify all the air quality data sets that are out there, look at them, compare them. I mean, we're not focused just on a single source of data. So I don't know if that answers the
I
question.
think that was referenced DEP so often, that was my main question, is if there's other information you can in consideration.
Okay, thank you. I apologize, I've been asking you if you want any redirect after each cross, but if you want any redirect. Joel Whiteman?
Yeah.
Come on down.
I write terribly, so I type. Any chance you want to switch me?
But you mean,
So I can hold my laptop and
Oh,
scroll?
yeah, that's
Do you
fine.
mind? I'm sorry.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
okay.
Are you aware that there are studies that conclude the gradient report on Fort Cherry school emissions that you referred to in your study is highly flawed in its methodology, scope, and objectivity?
I think maybe you're referring to something the Environmental Health Project put out. I am familiar with that. And again, I'll say that this was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. It was reviewed by other scientists who provided some comments, suggested revisions, and ultimately it was accepted for publication.
And who paid Gradient to do the study on Fort Cherry? Did the school?
No, the school did not. Our work was funded by Range Resources.
Do you know why they funded you to do that work?
I mean, they came to us to analyze and interpret the air quality data that they've been collecting.
You testified in your cross-examination by Mr. Taylor that some of these slides depict studies that are not yours. Can you tell me which studies are not yours specifically?
I mean, the majority of the slide, the Pennsylvania DEP that's not my data. The only study, as I recall, that I published was the Fort Cherry study.
Okay. How often are your monitors calibrated during the course of the study?
I mean, I think I've already mentioned I didn't collect the air quality data that was part of the Fort Cherry study. I don't have that information off the top of my head.
Are they calibrated by a third party then?
I believe that they are calibrated. I don't know the specifics.
Okay. Can you tell me if there will be any emissions of any kind at any point at this site specifically? The Olympus site that we're all discussing tonight?
So will there be air emissions?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would assume there will be air emissions.
Just wanted you to answer it. Have you ever done long-term air monitoring at Olympus well site specifically?
No.
Have you ever done air monitoring in Elizabeth Township specifically?
No.
Can you demonstrate for us here tonight the meteorological data or wind force in Elizabeth Township? Force in Elizabeth Township.
I'm familiar with meteorological data from a number of different locations within Allegheny County. I have a general sense of prevalent wind directions. I don't know if it's, I can't think of any data specific to it.
Yeah, not in Elizabeth Township, okay. Do you have data that represents the regular air inversion events that occur in Elizabeth Township?
I'm familiar with air inversion events being, occurring in Allegheny County, but not specifically how frequently they occur in Elizabeth Township.
So it would be fair to say that you cannot offer testimony to say without a doubt what we can expect at this site specifically from Olympus?
No, but they're going to be conducting air quality monitoring.
Okay, again, I just want to object to this study being submitted into evidence based on relevance. The study and data is not site-specific to this application, nor is this presentation in its entirety the work of this witness being testified to. Additionally, none of this presentation was made available as part of the application for public viewing prior to this evening.
I appreciate that. I'm gonna overrule that objection on the same grounds that I did for Mr. Taylor, because it was the same objection. I believe it's relevant in that he's testifying, although it's not site-specific, he's saying this is the testing that should be done here. So I think that's the tie that makes it relevant in my opinion.
Right, this is generalized information that is more than 8 years old. And I understand it is meant for recommendation, however, a recommendation of what should be done that was not part of the application is not relevant here. If Olympus planned to do air monitoring, that information should have been made available for review to the public prior to this evening.
Sure. Appreciate that. I'm gonna overrule it, because it could also be a condition set forth by the commissioners as well, so that wouldn't be in the application either.
Okay,
so
but
I appreciate that.
I would ask that all studies referred to in this presentation that were not conducted by the witness not be accepted into evidence.
As we've indicated before, Dr. Long has been qualified as an expert. An expert is allowed to rely upon studies in addition to what he's done, that he normally relies upon in his.
Yeah, he's been qualified as an expert, so that gives him the leeway to be able to rely on other things in order to give an expert opinion. So he's given that extra sort of ability because he was admitted as an expert. So good objections, but I'm gonna.
Thank you for switching.
Charles Salio. Is Charles still here? Karen Lynn.
My question was already,
Okay.
asked.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn. Amy Terza?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question regarding the Fort Cherry study that you did. What do you know about Fort Cherry School District? And what do you know about Elizabeth Forward School District? And we can look at the air quality and look at the studies that you've done with that. But I think we need to look at the districts and know that we're talking about apples to apples. For example, do you know if Elizabeth Forward School District has air-conditioned buildings?
I don't know.
Okay, we do not. So does Fort Cherry School District have air-conditioned buildings?
I don't know, that wasn't a part of the study that we were looking at outdoor air quality.
I feel that that's a very important component because at our high school, our school building is not air conditioned, none of the classrooms. And our windows are open in every single classroom, 8 out of the 10 months of the school year. So our children are breathing that air from the outside all day long.
Yeah. So
That's an issue.
your party, you're gonna have an opportunity to sort of say those things. This is cross-examination. I'm trying to give you some leeway because I know you're not counsel, so it really should just be questions in terms of what he's testified to. You started off.
Okay,
good.
so Fort Cherry School District,
Well,
he
that's
does
a-
not know if they have air
Good question, that's a good question, so that was
He
good.
did not know if Elizabeth.
That's right.
Air
If you
District.
can keep it on that straight and narrow, you're gonna be good. So, I'm gonna sustain the objection, but go ahead, continue.
So that was one of my issues.
Good question.
Can I grab my phone?
Sure.
Yeah, how close was the well in Fort Cherry? The well site to the high school building in comparison to
I have to go back to paper. I know the distance from the well pad to the monitoring sites in that range between 1,000 to 2,800 feet. The school was clearly further than 2,800 feet since it was beyond the furthest monitoring site. I think that's in the paper we published, the distance from the school.
I do have a quick direct on this one. When you were looking at the Fort Cherry air monitoring data, both for VOCs and for PM 2.5s, was the health-based standard that you were looking at a standard that assumed that someone was outside in proximity to those air emissions at all times?
Yes, that's correct. The comparison that we did was a screening level comparison, assuming essentially 24/7 exposure.
So if somebody were in a classroom with the windows open 24/7 and exposed to the complete amount that was monitored in the ambient air, it was still under the health-based benchmarks that you described?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Eric Piper.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I just have two questions, recently. So, based off your testimony, it's your opinion that the indoor air quality is not impacted negatively by unconventional open site like Olympus is putting out there, right? That's your testimony.
My testimony is based on the specific air quality.
So they hired you, that's your opinion, right? And that's what you're bringing to us. It's your opinion that it has no negative effects.
My testimony is that the air quality data, much of which I've talked about today, do not indicate, the widespread occurrence of air concentrations of potential health concerns.
So the air data that you looked at, not everything that's out there, you came to that conclusion that it has no negative impacts.
I obviously did not talk about all of the data that's out there.
Yeah, because I didn't see nitrogen oxides in there, right?
No, you're correct. Pennsylvania DEP is monitoring NO2 at a number of the monitoring sites that I talked about.
Yeah, I see that though.
No,
that can play a negative impact, right?
Sure, and high enough exposure to NO2 can have adverse health effects.
All right. So your opinion is that these wells won't have a negative impact on our community or our school. I mean, that's why you're here, to put, as their counsel said, to put us all at ease that the safety, we should be okay. My question to you is everybody in your line of work feel the same way? Are there other people out there that feel the opposite? Maybe like Nick Euler, professor at CMU, who feels the total opposite, that contributes that 1,200 to 4,600 people die in air quality.
He's testifying.
No, I'm asking him a question. Are there other people in your line of work that feel not the same wage, that maybe it does have a negative impact.
Yes, I mean, there are people concerned about, and I'm concerned as well, and I'm just interpreting the air quality data. Are there people who have a different interpretation of the air quality data? I don't know specifically.
Sure, well, I just listed one, and I'll be able to, but I do appreciate you coming up and offering your opinion, but that's all I have. Appreciate it.
I just have one quick follow-up. Have you in the past had an opportunity to look at the PADEC data with respect to NO2 we were just asked about?
Yes, I have looked at NO2 prior analysis of the data.
And what were your overall conclusions about whether they're elevated in these areas of oil and gas development?
As I recall, the monitoring, again, did a similar comparison of data for shale gas areas to non-shale gas areas. As I recall, there did not appear to be elevated NO2 in the areas of shale gas activity.
Thank you.
It's 10:16, not too bad. Unless there's any objections, we are going to continue this hearing. The next hearing will be held on September the 15th, again in this building, in this room at 7 o'clock. With that, we will.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just have two quick exhibit housekeeping matters, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I would just like to offer Dr. Long's CV as E1 and a hard copy of Dr. Long's PowerPoint as E.
They'll be admitted. With that, we'll continue until September 15th.